So
Okay.
good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our part of our 8-part webinar series of REFRAME, which is a prelude to our REFRAME 2024 conference that we'll be holding on October 16th through 19th. I'm Carlos Garcia, and joining me is Hector Garcia, CPA. We're the co-hosts of this upcoming amazing event. We're excited to have you. I know many of you are already coming and attending, so thanks for being part of this. And today we have a really phenomenal guest that will be joining us later. But before we go into that, let's tell you a little bit, if you're joining for the first time, about what is this webinar series and what is REFRAME all about. So this is one of 8 webinars that we've been doing leading up to REFRAME coming in October. And each webinar, we have a different guest join us. Some of these guests are actually going to join us in October to do a keynote to expand on their subject matter expertise. And we dive deep enough to get you excited about how to implement some of these concepts and ideas so that when you get ready for October, you know exactly what to expect and how to help you level up and rebrand yourself and reframe the way you look at your business and how to communicate in a more influential fashion, which is the theme of our conference, Influential Conversations for Accountants. So a little bit about REFRAME. It's going to be held in Hollywood, Florida from October 16th through 19th. If you haven't gotten your ticket yet, make sure you go to www.reframe2024.com. The window is closing in fairly quickly. And we already have about, Hector, 115, 120 to date.
That's accurate. Yep.
And so we're excited. We are getting ready. All of our speakers, all of our guests, all of our coaches, we're all ready to go. We have a lot of partners that are joining us as well. Headline sponsor, a shout out to Fishbowl, who is headlining this. And it's going to be an event full of transformative experiences. I mean, this is not your typical conference or event. We're all going to be in a room together going through like thinking exercises that are going to challenge you to get a little bit uncomfortable and to really look at the way you approach conversations in a different way, the way you approach curiosity and questions, and not just from a standpoint of sales, but from marketing, from branding, from positioning, from leadership standpoint, from a community, and from a self-influence standpoint, which means is like, how do you influence yourself to think at a deeper level? How do you slow down the process so that you're not, stuck in these moments that might stop you from growing, from learning, from staying curious so that you can accomplish more. And so, again, if you haven't done so, we invite you to go to the website and join us. It's going to be a once in a lifetime experience, and we're very excited about that. But with that, without further ado, Chris, welcome. I see you here on the screen. Thanks for being here, sir.
Can you hear me?
Good afternoon. Welcome. Or good morning over in LA.
Yes. Good morning and good afternoon to you.
So excited to have you, man. But let me actually turn it over to Hector, because I know Hector's got a little bit of a cool story to tell, and
Okay.
It's all going to come together, and then we'll bring you on board to share a conversation with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris, just hang on for a minute. I'm going to play a video really quick. Okay, I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to play this 2-minute video, and then we're going to contextualize it in the conversation, I promise. Chris, I'm hoping that you haven't seen this before.
Well, here I am. What can I do for you?
What do you think?
I think you wouldn't be in the presidential suite right now if you worked for free.
Don, this is friendly.
Connie, this is my profession. What do you want me to do?
I want you to give me one for free.
I don't think anybody wants to think about a mouse in a hotel.
Yeah, I paused it for a second. Just I wanted to give you some preface. So this is from a TV show called Mad Men. And the 2 people here is the main character who works in advertising. His name is Don Draper. And the person that he's meeting for the first time is Conrad Hilton, the owner of the Hilton Hotels. he met him in some party. He liked him. He cited him over to his presidential suite per se, and he said, what can I do for you? And he showed him basically sort of a piece of advertising that they're working in. He takes a deep breath. He looks at it. Obviously, Conrad's Hilton idea, and maybe it's a true story. Maybe this is basically dramatized, but his idea was a lovable character, a little mouse, showing the people around. And he, takes a puff of the smoke, thinks about it for a little bit, and says one thing, right, that encapsulates bravado, self-esteem, experience, everything. And it says, nobody wants to think about a mouse when it comes to a hotel. So Conrad Hilton cited him basically for free advice. He caved in. He actually did give the free advice, but how long did that free advice take? So he gave him a little bit of a sample, but he did make a point prior to doing that, saying you wouldn't be in the presidential suite if you worked for free. So one thing I want to just kind of encapsulate is that there are ways to communicate very succinctly, be able to show your expertise, and be able to set your boundaries and set your lines all in once in very, very, very short period. This is what I want to do. This is as an accounting professional, as an advisor, I want to figure out how to be like this. So I'm going to play the rest of the clip, and then we'll get right into the interview with Chris.
Well, that was my idea. You got something better?
I might.
So, what do you want?
I'm not gonna lie, I'd love a chance of your business.
Okay. But the next time somebody like me asks you a question like that, you need to think bigger.
Now, this is the owner of Hilton, one of the biggest brands. This is back in the, 50s or 60s or whatever this was. And this is probably going to be the biggest client that this guy has ever gotten. He's sitting right there in front of the biggest whale, biggest client possible. And he said, what do you want? He said, I want a chance of your business. Very simple. And then he tells him this response, but then take a look at this response back, which I think is brilliant.
Well, Connie, there are snakes that go months without eating, and then they finally catch something. But they're so hungry that they suffocate while they're eating. One opportunity at a time.
I love that, and I want to give credit to my friend Ron Baker, who was in last year's conference, and Ed Kless, his co-host at the Soul of Enterprise, who's going to be in this year's conference. They use this clip in almost every live session that they teach, and because there's so much packed in this 2-minute scene. There is give me one for free. There is you wouldn't be where you are if you work for free. There is long pauses, right? The advice that he gave was incredible, and it wasn't about how many words he packed in there. Even the pauses are sort of strategically in the writing. So anyway, I wanted to show you that clip, and I put a link to it if you want to watch the whole thing afterwards in the slides, because I had a moment like this, a moment just like this last year at the 2023 conference. So last year's conference, the original name is the Alt Accountants Conference. We had this long-lasting brand called the Alt Accountant, which is a concept I came up with like 6 years ago. And then I came up with the Alt Accountants Conference. But the theme was creative business models for accountants. Now, I designed this logo myself. I called it creative because Chris Do was coming to speak. He's the most creative person I know. I brought in business models because Ron Baker was coming in to speak, and he recently wrote a book about a different business model, the subscription business model. And I have the word accountant in there because those are the people that came to this conference. So I thought this was a brilliant thing. I'm a non-designer, I'm an accountant. And I came up with this brilliant logo, and I'm using brilliant in air quotes here. And I purposefully left creative and accountants in white and business models in red. So from a very far away, it says creative accountants. And that's supposed to be part of the shock value. So I was sitting in lunch on day one of last year's conference, and I was so proud of like the way the logo looked all over the place. and Chris was having lunch with us. And I said, Chris, what do you think about the logo? I designed it myself. And Chris doesn't smoke, but he took the same type of break, like that deep breaths before giving a piece of advice. And this time around, he gave us a free one, and he didn't say that he was good, that we wouldn't be where we are if we were charging for free. But he basically took a long pause and said, how are you going to fit all that into a hashtag? And Carlos and I looked at each other, and our mouths were gaped open, because both of us loved the name. We loved the concept, but he really quick had this Don Draper moment where he didn't have to say much. How are you going to fit all that into a hashtag, encapsulate it? How are you going to market this? How is this going to have any buzz in social media? This name is too long, possibly too complicated. You have to have more of a catchy name. And Carlos and I looked at each other like, you're right. Well, what should I call it? And Chris didn't give me the answer. Chris asked me questions. He said, well, what are you trying to achieve? And I said, well, I'm trying to help myself and accounting professionals run their businesses better. He's like, okay, but how? I'm like, well, by using the creativity muscle, by thinking outside the box, by looking at other industries, seeing what they do and adapting the best things from it. Like the Ron Baker concept of what if Disney were to open an accounting profession? We brainstorm about that, and then we borrow ideas from that, and we kind of implement it into a practice. And Chris is like, okay, wait, so how are you helping accountants get better? How are you helping them? I'm like, well, my purpose is to rebrand the profession to be sought after as creative and innovative and forward-looking. And Chris said, but how? How are they going to achieve this? And I said, well, I guess they can't change what we do, but all we can do is reframe how accounting is perceived. And then he took a long pause and said, that's the name. I said, what's the name? REFRAME. And then Carlos and I looked at each other and we're like, wow. So Chris Do was the Don Draper for us. So I wanted to kind of show you that video and give you that background because of how much Chris Do means to us. He's a close friend. Any opportunities we have to engage and work together. Carlos and I are always going to be open for that. Chris Do is not an accountant. He's a designer. He's an award-winning designer. He's a keynote speaker for all major industry conferences like Adobe Max and all these big conferences for graphic designers and marketing and branding people. He speaks there. He wrote a book called A Pocket Full of Dough, which I recommend. It's a beautiful book. I mean, it's a beautifully designed book. Has this huge YouTube channel, 2.5 million subscribers. His goal of his company and his channel is to teach 1 billion people how to make a living doing what they love. And I hope I didn't butcher that. Has an Instagram channel, has a LinkedIn channel. I recommend you subscribe to all YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn. Has a podcast, which is wonderful, and is the founder of the Future Pro community, which also inspired Carlos and I to build our Alt Accountant community. So long intro to bring Chris Do in. Chris, we're going to ask you a couple of questions. Carlos, I'll let you add something, and then we'll get right into the questions, into the interview.
Well, my only add is, Chris, what would you add based on Hector's intro? Any additional things you remember from our conversation, which I felt like was such a huge, change. It was just a significant moment during, the middle of the conference for Hector and I to be able to pivot and have the flexibility to do that. And also just knowing how nimble the audience was with us, that we were transforming together.
Yeah, I'm going to nerd out with you for a little bit. And what I like to do is zoom in and zoom out a lot to help people see the things. And my background is in creativity. When Hector said he's not an accountant, I'm like, thank God, because I'm not good with numbers. My financial people talk to me about numbers, my eyes glaze over. So that's not my gift. Clearly, it is your gift. And you guys are very good at that, especially in the accounting, financing, bookkeeping community. The thing that everybody needs to realize is it's very hard for us to have perspective because we're so close to the problem. We're so attached and enrolled in this thing that we're building. There's this phenomenon. It's a cognitive bias. It's called the IKEA effect. Like IKEA makes really cheap furniture. And we have an unusual emotional attachment to $50 bookshelves and chairs. And sometimes it's frustrating to put together with missing pieces and broken parts. Yet we love our IKEA furniture for some reason. So the IKEA effect is that kind of bias that when you build something, the process of building it makes you fall in love with it even more. So when you build a Lego toy, if it were to break, you would be heartbroken. But if you're just given a pre-built toy, there's no emotional energy invested in that. So if it breaks, it's not a big deal. We'll just buy a new one. And IKEA understands this really well. The part of the problem is we lose objectivity, and we're so close to it that we can't, as they say, read the label inside the jar. So you guys are staring at this problem like, we love creative business strategy management for accountants. I'm like, huh? What kind of name is that? And you can't see it, but a stranger from the outside can see it and say, hey, guys, that's a mouthful. And when names are longer than 2 or 3 syllables, people then start to abbreviate, like IBM, International Business Machines, and eventually they forget even the name. And acronyms mostly have no meaning at all, right? A lot of people didn't even know what IBM stood for. And it starts to loop like FBI, and there's the games that people play with acronyms. So what I'm saying to you as a professional service provider from one business to another business, what you provide as a service provider to your clients is that perspective, because they're inside the jar too. That's why it's really important for you to say, like, we're looking at your numbers and we're seeing something. Are you aware that this is happening? That most of your revenue comes only from 2 clients. That what you believe might be super profitable is actually costing you money when you look at the numbers, because the numbers don't lie. Now, they tell different stories depending on who's deciphering it, but they don't lie. So naturally, you guys are like, well, there's nothing wrong with this name. Of course, it's great. Of course, because I designed the logo is great. But a stranger, an outsider, objectively can say that and say, look, why are you doing it this way? Lesson number 2 is when you call it like alt accountants or creative accountants, do accountants identify themselves as creative? And do customers who see creative accountants see that as a benefit? So there are 2 really big questions to ask ourselves, right? I think in a lot of things, I don't want my doctor to be creative. I want them to be effective. And I want my accountant to be effective, not so much creative, because when accountants get creatives, I feel like we're going to jail, we're going to get audited. So those aren't necessary positive associations when you zoom out. I got the core and essence of what you and Hector are building. So he said, what is it you're really trying to do? What is the philosophy behind this? Well, we want to reposition how accountants are seen by their clients, because we're on this mission to save accounting. And that's really powerful to me. So what you're doing is you're reframing the profession, you're reframing the practice of it. And I think that's the important part. So now we can push towards a bigger idea. And ideally, we have a name that's less than 6 or 7 words, 1 or 2 syllables, that's easy to pronounce, easy to remember. And just to think, if someone was so excited about your conference and wanted to invite their friends, if they said, hey, you got to come to the creative business strategy for accountants, nobody's going to remember that. And so there's another lesson. Lesson number 3 is you have to have a repeatable story. It's great when you're pitching, but it's better when someone else is pitching your story for you. So it needs to be super compact, efficient, and transportable such that people can share with others. What people don't realize is the name is one of the most important aspects of a brand, because it's the first thing anybody learns about a brand is your name. So in the old days, advertising agencies were called Wyden and Kennedy, Chiat Day. But the new agencies are called Ignite or something different, is because it's easy to call it and model yourself after law firms. But law firms aren't known for their creativity, right? So Chiat Day's subdivision that works exclusively with Apple is called Media Arts Lab. It's not called Chiat Day Jr. So it's kind of interesting how you can inject a little bit of creativity and capture emotion, feeling, and more importantly, a philosophy. Now, I want to break down that Don Draper clip. And Hector, I have seen all of Mad Men, every single episode, and it's wonderful. I do want to caution people of a couple different things. Mad Men existed in an era where some of this kind of posturing and kind of cocky, pompous attitude worked, and it was bravado, and it was like chest beating, and Don Draper is that perfect person, and he plays that to the T. He's a bit of a womanizer, like, what is it? He's a philanderer, and he browbeats his clients, and he's sometimes irresponsible, but that was the era in which you could do that. Today, if you pulled off anything closely resembling what Don Draper did, you'd be fired, you'd be canceled, you'd probably be reported to HR and other people. But there are some brilliant things underneath all that bravado. I don't recommend anybody take any approach that's close to that at all. If you didn't notice, and I want to point this out, this is Conrad Hilton in the time in which Conrad Hilton is an industry titan, and his business means everything to the agency that Don Draper works for. And you know what he does? He calls him Connie, to kind of feminize him and to diminish him, to say, I have more power than you, bro. And the long puff of smoke is for him to tease this thing out and to say, I'm not in a rush to do anything you tell me. I'm the one person that you can't boss around. Because in that fictional or dramatized scenario, whoever was the bigger guy, it was a measuring stick competition, if you know what I mean. He wanted to make sure his stick was bigger. And that's what he did. But the brilliant part is he understood his position, he understood his value, and he knew that by casting some doubt on whatever it is that they're doing, it would create an opening for him. And even when Conrad Hilton said, next time somebody asks you a question like that, think bigger. He just didn't accept that. He had to then one up that person by saying, one bite at a time, a snake that's starving eats and it chokes itself. It's a metaphor, obviously. So he's defending his position like, I just want to start small. But the real lesson there is a lot of times we have these really big ambitious things we want to sell to our customers, and they just need to get started. Because what Don Draper probably should have said instead is like, I'm so confident that when you start working with us, you'll want to give us all of your business. That's really what it is. So what we do is we give people a small taste of what it's like to work with us. And if we're confident in what we do, in who we are, our values, and how pleasant the customer experience is going to be, people will naturally want even more. And then we activate a second form of cognitive bias, which is the loss aversion bias. Like once you have something, you don't want to give it up. And so a lot of you who are trying to do all the accounting for all families and to sign a really big account, you're probably shooting yourself in the foot. Just start small. Like, what's the one thing I can get off your plate right now that's going to make your life easier so you can focus on your primary thing, which is not to worry about the counting, but to run your business and to be the visionary that you are. So we just break it down because you eat an elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah, I just want to reset the room for those who are joining us just now. We're talking to Chris Doe, an expert in all things branding, marketing, communications, huge mentor for Carlos and I. He will be at REFRAME 2024 in Hollywood, Florida, October 16th to October 19th. If you have not gotten your ticket, go to reframe2024.com. This is the last of the 8-part webinar series that we've had to promote the conference. So, Chris, I want to ask you the next question. And by the way, thank you so much for being so much better at contextualizing that clip that I was. I want to go back really quick to the mission that we had. The mission is rebrand the profession to be sought after as the most innovative, creative, and forward-looking of all professions. You already made it a point that the word creative and accountant is one that a lot of people just don't feel comfortable with. Now, I might be a little bit gutsy saying you should feel comfortable with it because like we did last year and we will do this year, I believe that there's a part of our brain that can unlock so many possibilities that allow us to stand out, that allow us to be different, that allow us to connect with our clients directly. And that's that creativity muscle. So we already are being, quote, innovative by adding multiple technologies, by looking at different points of view. We are being forward-looking by advising to our clients, talking about budgets and forecasting, helping our clients grow, help us get there. But I still believe creativity is part of the formula. And I understand how you're framing it. But I wanted to ask you if you were working within those restrictions, like I just hired you, your creative firm, to help my firm adopt this ethos, right? We want to be seen as innovative, creative, and forward-looking, and gutsy enough to say as the most innovative, most creative, and most forward-looking of all professions. What would you advise to a firm that wants to adapt this concept?
Okay, wonderful. And it's going to be an interesting thing as you set me up for this question. is you don't want to talk about what you do. So if you say we're an accounting firm, that's kind of what you do. You don't want to talk about your own adjectives, like we're a gutsy accounting firm, because what's in it for me? You want to reframe everything that you do as a benefit that's perceived by the prospect, the buyer. So I used to run a design firm, and you wouldn't call yourself Strategic Creative Design Incorporated because that's a least creative company. You'd have to think about like insight or growth or impact or something that matters to the buyer, right? A buddy of mine who does podcasts producing for other authors and experts, I watched a clip and I was talking to him about this. I said, what do you help your clients do? He says, well, ultimately, I think grow authority. I'm like, and what does that mean? What does that mean? And then he got to it. It's like reach. Okay. I want to help them with their reach. That's a term that people understand. So if he called himself Professional Podcast Production Company Incorporated, no one would hire him, or not as many people would hire him. So I said, your name is Rich. Aren't you Richie Rich? A play on Richie Rich. He goes, yeah, I like that, but maybe that's going to be a little corny, right? I'm like, yeah, you have to work with that. It's a raw idea. Take it and run with it. So recently I saw him talking about giving advice on things that creators who want to create a podcast should do. And he ended it with this CTA, which I thought was really good. He said, I help experts increase their reach. When you think of reach, think of rich. Alliteration, not cheesy. When you think of reach, think of rich. When I think of a benefit that I want, an impact that's going to be meaningful to me, I think of his name. And alliteration really helps us. So there's a reason why companies use alliteration like that, because it's a mnemonic. It's a heuristic to remember something. So think about that. So for those people who are thinking about being a creative or gutsy accounting firm, what you don't do is you don't call it that. What you do is you act as a creative, gutsy accounting firm. So don't tell me, show me. Okay, I'll give you a really simple example. In the medical space, it's a pretty boring, predictable space. So a little bit of change, like my friend Errol Garrison would say, stand out 1/8 of an inch is all you need to be radically different than everybody else. And in branding, being different is the name of the game. It's not always being better, but just be different by 1/8 of an inch. There's a whole story behind that. I'm not going to get into it. So I go see my dermatologist. They're in Santa Monica. And what was interesting to me was how tapped into technology they were. So after I finished my doctor's appointment, I go to square up the bill, whatever. And the person at the counter says, Chris, do you want us to send this to your pharmacy, or do you just want us to ship it to you? I was like, ship it to me? You're going to save me from going to the pharmacy, standing in line and paying. You're just going to ship it to me? She goes, yes. And I thought, man, that's pretty innovative. You saved me a trip. You looked at a common problem that 100% of dermatologists before said there's no room for innovation here. And they're just like, we'll take care of it. There was no extra fee for it. And then she said, you're due for a re-up 6 months. We'll text you to see if you want to re-up, and we'll just send you another set. Oh my God, that's innovation. So when you look at your practice and you look at the entire customer journey from the moment they're thinking about an accountant to the moment which they fire their accountant, map that out and look for areas where you can innovate. That's where you apply your creativity. It could be in the onboarding process. It could be the tone and voice. It could be the way that you dress. You're not like any accountant I've ever met. So you're demonstrating versus talking about it. So there are people who talk the talk, and there's people who walk the walk. And I think the people who walk the walk are way more powerful. So just look at the customer journey, and you can use AI to do this. You can ask AI, a chatbot, because I know we talked a lot about AI last conference, and I'm sure there's going to be more AI stuff. Ask AI to describe a typical client scenario for a business owner living in this market with this kind of income, running this kind of business, who's looking to work with an accountant or switch. Design the customer journey and describe that to me just as an outline, and then you'll see it. Then you can break that down, and then you can see, look for ways to innovate. Okay. So AI is really good at doing really analytical, research-based things if you give it the right prompt. So many of you haven't done that before, have mapped out the customer journey, and look for ways to make a small improvement, which will then make a big impact. If you do that, people are going to talk about it. The dermatologist has not paid me to talk about their business, but I'm talking about it.
Chris, one takeaway from this is that innovation doesn't always have to be a technology thing, right? Because typically there's an association with the word innovation with it has to be tech dependent, right? Like technology is the thing that drives innovation, when where truly innovation is about thinking. It starts with imagination. It starts with thinking of a better way, with thinking of making something better, faster, more efficient, whatever that looks like. But it starts from the mind. It starts from the creative human spirit. And I think that's a huge takeaway for me. And, you know, in the accounting industry, what I have observed, and I'm sure Hector will attest to this, is that there's a lot of technology dependent things. And I feel like maybe vendors and software companies use the word innovation so much that maybe it's subconsciously ingrained, you know, in our space as, oh, okay, innovation needs to be a technology thing, but it could be process oriented. It could be, if we can innovate the way we have conversations with our customers, we can innovate the way we elevate the experience for our customers. We can innovate the way we differentiate ourselves with the competition. We can innovate the way we position ourselves to be more different. So wanted to see if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring up the word innovation in tech, because for my brain, innovation has nothing to do with technology. Technology is just an application of it. There's lots of different things that you can do. I'll give you an example of a really low cost, and oftentimes the most innovative ideas to me are dealt with very tight parameters and constraints. Like give yourself $50 as the budget and see what you can come up with. And it'll force you to think about different things. Oftentimes when you have a brainstorming session with your team, like, let's be innovative. We just got off this webinar. Then the team's like, what if we bought all our clients a timeshare? It's like, how are we going to do that, guys? You guys are insane. So say you have $50, think of an idea that we can do that is replicable, or repeatable, that we can then do this across all our clients. So one thing that my former business coach, Keir McLaren, would say to me is every time I go to visit one of my clients that he was coaching, he would walk the premises, he'd walk the floor, and he would try to imagine himself as a stranger walking into a space, trying to understand what's going on, to see the world anew. So when he walked through our space, he goes, when I walk through your space, I have no idea what this is. Is this a hair salon? Is this a production company? Is this an agency? What is this? Because I can't tell. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, why don't you have any artwork of the things that you do for your clients? That would tell a story. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, whenever you go to a production company, a move like one who makes movies, do you know what they have along their hallway? The movie posters of the movies they produce. So when you walk in there, even if it might not be a fancy office, you're like, oh my God, you guys are the ones who made 300 or Terminator, and you're just blown away. So the story is already being told for you in framing the experience. Like big, serious, important ideas were made here. And so he gave us permission to show our work, which we were a little shy to put up on the wall. We put up a lot of artwork, but none of our own. And then he said, look, here's the thing. Why is the customer's parking spot over there? It's the hardest spot to get into. I said, well, clients rarely visit us, and I want to be a good boss, so I gave the best parking spots to my star employees, because that's hogwash. Tell them to park somewhere else, save the easiest and best parking spaces for your clients. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. He goes, next, when they visit, make a sign and say, welcome, John, welcome, Hector, welcome, Carlos. That costs 8 cents to print. And you know what? Of all the things we've ever done, fancy client dinners, buying them gifts, the thing they most remark about, the things that are most heartfelt, is because they have a sign that says reserved for John or Mary. And I was like, this is crazy. Our clients never take pictures of anything, because these are like fancy advertising people, but they're taking selfies in front of their parking spot because for 1 minute, they felt special, like a VIP. This is innovation, and it costs 8 cents, right? So those are the kinds of little things that you can do to stand out 1/8 of an inch to be radically different than everyone else who's in your field. And those little touches require a spark of creativity. Now, all you left brain people are very logical. And to borrow a phrase from Rory Sutherland, who I was turned on to by you guys, and also from Ron Baker, who's like, Chris, you got to talk to this guy. He's a genius in advertising and marketing. He said that logic is the enemy of magic. Logic follows like a mathematical formula. A plus B always equals C. Whereas creativity and magic is in kind of like divergent thinking, not convergent thinking. Convergent thinking is logic. Input always equals output. Input always equal output. But where creatives really shine, and I believe in all of you, is a frustrated creative person waiting to play. And I want to give you your crowns back so you can play and exercise that brain of yours that was so magical when you're 6 or 7 years old, when you saw the world for what it could be, not for what it is. So we're, in a way, futurists. We imagine and rehearse possible future outcomes, borrowing from Brian Collins, and we pick the most optimal path towards the ideal outcome. And that's what you're doing with your clients. So think about what you can do to innovate one small thing and use heavy constraints so that it limits what you're going to do. Because the easier it is to implement, the more likely it is you're going to do it. So we don't need a whole customer experience platform. We don't need a brand new website or an app. That costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time. Find one small thing.
And what's interesting, I mean, we can go so many ways. I'll just make one tiny point on this big idea that you're talking about, is that think about what happened in the pandemic when so many restraints happened and how small business needed to innovate, right? Like how restaurants needed to innovate by turning to Uber Eats, and how in-person meetings needed to innovate by making them virtual meetings, by accelerating the adoption of certain technologies that we didn't know needed to happen. But unfortunately, certain restraints needed to happen, and they got forced through the entire globe for this innovation to be forced to happen. And so it's, how do we put ourselves in these practice scenarios, these like you said, constrained situations, but it just to force us, to help us to play creatively and to move our business forward. Now, I want to ask a question for the audience, okay? And type in the chat with a thumbs up, with a yes, or with a no, if you are active on social media, meaning that if your company is actively creating content or finding a way to position themselves to gain market share, customers, yes, no, okay. And I want to preface that, Chris, so you have a little bit of context of kind of like where this audience is, because one of the biggest things that I heard you say to me when I first interviewed you for my podcast is that you said that every business in today's age is a media company. So I'd love for you to expand on that, because I think you bring a wonderful point of view from that.
Sure thing. We live in the age of social media and mass communication, from one to many and many to many. And it's very different than the previous couple of decades, right? And if you're still operating with the rules of the previous decade, you're a decade behind. So not only are you not innovating, you're a laggard, a late adopter, the last to get on board. And that's the death of innovation there. So I say this because I really believe this, that all companies are media companies. They just don't know it yet. So when you look at a company like Red Bull, they're probably the darling of this example, where yes, they make an energy drink that tastes a little funky. They weren't necessarily first to market, but what they did was they started to create a network where people would produce content, and rather than spending their money in traditional advertising, which they still do, they would sponsor events and do outrageous things. And when you associate extreme sports or people living to their fullest, you see and think of Red Bull. So I think, and I'd argue, that's way more effective than their little cartoon that says Red Bull gives you wings, which doesn't even make sense to me. But when I see young people cliff diving or flying out with one of those bat wing suits, it's usually a person with a Red Bull. When that guy Felix, who jumped off the hot air balloon and did the longest skydive in the history of the world, that was a Red Bull media event. So it's really interesting that they've learned how to capture media to produce content to build community. So there's this idea. And the idea is, I think, something from Michael Margolis, who wrote the book Story 10X. He says something to the effect of a product or service that doesn't have a story is a commodity. Okay? And somebody asked me to defend that position. I'm like, okay. So when a product has no story, it's like all other products. I can't tell it from the other. So when there is no differentiation, no meaningful differentiation, what do? I choose the most available and the most affordable. And there are many things that live in that category where you just buy because it's the cheapest and the most easy to acquire. So that's a danger all of you in this field run into, which is what makes you different? Because if you're not different, then I'll just go with someone who charged me less per filing or per hour. And you're going to struggle with this because it's then hard to command a premium. It's hard to justify why anyone would pay you more. And the way you combat that is you start to educate people on the differentiations between you and the next available person. Now we know this. We hire and work with people that we know, that we like, and that we trust. In order for me to hire you, I need to know that you exist. So if you're not in the media game, you're making it really hard for people to find you. If you're not optimizing your site with SEO, you're making it even more difficult. If you don't create any content, you're making it really difficult. The reason why I imagine a lot of you are on this call today is because there's a young man who produces content for accountants on YouTube, and his name is Hector. And he's built authority in this space, and he teaches you hacks and things that you can do to be a better accountant or to use QuickBooks in ways that you didn't know you could do. He's created authority. Now, is he the best person to use QuickBooks? Probably not, but he's probably the best known person to do it for accountants. And that says something. So we associate expertise and credibility, sadly, with fame. The more famous you are at doing something, the more people associate with you as being the best. And it's a common mistake. The most famous designers also oftentimes credit as being the best designer, and that's not true at all, not even close. So we say, like, in the previous era, it was really about the quality of work. It was about professionalism. And in the new era, it's about, do I know who you are? Do I like you? Do I trust you? So we've transformed from that. And the reason being is quality is a given. Quality is the cost of entry. You cannot hang your hat on quality anymore because there are a lot of quality restaurants who make high quality food that are going out of business. But you know what? The ones that aren't are typically the ones have a celebrity chef indoors. Because now I feel special. Oh my God, Gordon's back there. Can you say hi to Gordon for me? Or Bobby Flay's back there. Oh my God, he's here today. And he comes out and you feel like better for it. And you feel a lot better to pay a little bit more for the steak or the tuna tartare or whatever it is that you've ordered because you know a story about the person whose concept was in this restaurant. And it's probably been 10 years since Bobby's touched anything on the line as a chef, but you still buy into that story. So we need to be better at creating media because it creates an opportunity for people to get to know us, to make a determination if they like us, and liking is the beginning of trust. So it's the name of the game, is to be easier to find than your competitor. That's it.
Now, I want to reset the room for those who joined us late. This is part 8 of the 8-part webinar series called Influential Conversations for Accountants. We're chatting with Carlos, and I are chatting with Chris Doe, our dear friend and an expert in all things marketing and branding. Once again, if you have not signed up for the conference, go to reframe2024.com, do yourself a favor, and come to this transformative event so we can continue this conversation. Reframe2024.com, Hollywood, Florida, October 16th to the 19th. And we are at the finish line here because I just wanted to add something. September 24, I believe, is the last day that the hotel will give you the room block rate. So we have actually plenty of tickets. We actually we got a room big enough to outgrow last year's conference and have plenty of people that want to sign up in the last 30 days or so. But if you are traveling, you have to book by September 24th so you get the room block rate. Chris, thank you very much for all of that. And you talk about Rory Sutherland. I want to say something fairly quick. There are 2 books that have heavily and deeply impacted me in the last couple of years in the areas of communications. Now, I have been discovering that studying marketing is studying communications because not all communication is verbal. Some communication is visual. Some communication is written. Some communication is a combination of things. And I've learned so much from a book called Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. And somewhere in the book, he explains about an advertising deal they had with, I think it was a British Airlines. And British Airlines had just upgraded all the planes. They had all the brand newest planes. And they had two marketings that they were A/B testing. One showed all the newest technology, all the new planes, and the other one showed pictures of the food that they served in the plane. And they tested this with a focus group, and 8 out of 10 preferred the pictures of the food. And the executives were just mind blown. They were like, but we just spent billions and billions and billions of dollars in brand new airplanes. Why isn't that what people want? That's the plane. And it just teaches a very powerful lesson that sometimes what you think you're selling is not what you're selling. Or like you say, the accounting quality of work or the brand new plane is table stakes. That's like, people are past that. Now they want to know, okay, I get it. I want a plane. The plane's not going to crash. How am I going to feel by being in the plane? And that's kind of like, I think about accounting. It's, like we focus so much on how accurate the numbers are and how quickly we categorize things. And we focus very little on how we make people feel about the work that we do. So that book, Alchemy by Rory Sutherland, like just highly, highly influenced me. And the other book is Exactly What to Say by Phil Jones, which we actually had Phil Jones in a past episode, so I won't spend too much time about that. And we're going to have both Chris and Phil Jones in conference, and maybe one day we'll bring Rory Sutherland if he wants to come hang out with us. But I wanted to ask you, Chris, which one book about marketing and communications? And I know you probably had many that impacted you, but which one do you think that us accounting pros will read, and it will help us a lot to kind of think a little bit more like you when it comes to marketing and communications?
Wow, okay. I don't know if you'll read it, but it's a really good book. It's called A Smile in the Mind. And it talks about wit and humor and conceptual thinking. It was a book that was out of print, so for a period of time, it would cost you over $100 or more to buy it on Amazon. Thankfully, I believe it's in a reprint, so I don't know how long those books will last, but I highly recommend that you buy it. And you don't need to read it, just put it on your desk so that in case you want to read it, it's available. But if you wait too long, you might not be able to buy it again, and you're going to pay the used book price, which is much more than the new book price. So buy A Smile in the Mind. I'll explain to you some of the concepts, and it has explained very clearly things that I understood, but it just says it much better than I could ever explain. Okay? So it studies powerful graphic design, communication, and advertising and marketing campaigns. And they talk about like why we have a reaction, an emotional reaction. Because you can think like when we see something, we smile in our mind. What's happening is the creator of the campaign creates a puzzle for us to solve. If the puzzle's too easy, it's not intriguing to us at all. And if the puzzle's too challenging, we'll get frustrated and we'll move on. The magic is to create a puzzle that has enough clues in it that we can figure it out. And when we do, something magical happens inside of us. We feel smarter. We feel like we're part of the club and we're above everyone else. It's really interesting, the psychological thing that's happening. And so many years ago, I read a statistic. The longest viewed ad in the history of the world was an ad from Honda. I think this was in the 80s or the 90s. And what they had were a bunch of vanity plates, because we're trying to decipher each of the vanity plates. And every time we got one, we're like, oh, I'm smart. Let me figure the next one. And this is a game I play with my kids when we're driving on the street and I figure out what the vanity plate says. I'm like, guys, what is this one? And they'll sound it out. No one can get it. And then eventually someone gets it and they're like, I did it, Dad. I did it. And you feel victorious. So when you're talking about brilliant marketing, advertising, communications, it's like you're having a very private conversation to a mass audience, and a couple that are really smart ones will figure it out. I'll give you an example. If you look up advertising campaign for The Economist magazine, it is probably the most consistent, brilliant, longest lasting group of copywriters you've ever seen. And if you've ever seen an Economist ad, it's exactly the same. All of them are the same, except for the thinking. It's a red background with white serif type, and it says something. Like some of the ideas are the pregnant pause, don't be the father. The Economist magazine targets C-suite executives, upper management, VPs and Ps, senior vice presidents of corporations. It says lose the ability to disappear out of a meeting unnoticed. Another ad says, I've never read the Economist magazine. And at the bottom, it quotes, 49-year-old middle manager. So you see, it's like dumb people won't figure it out. And when you figure it out, you're like, oh, I get you. You're talking to me. I feel included. I feel like I got the secret Dick Tracy decoder ring. And I'm in on the joke. So read that. Now, I want to say a couple of things. I want to share a framework with all of you to help you become a better student of advertising. I don't have my sketchbook or my Wacom tablet connected right now. But what I want you to do is just draw this out with me, okay? Create 3 columns on a piece of paper. 3 columns, 3 vertical columns. At the top, say what they make. The second column, how they sell. And third column, why you buy. Okay? How they sell and why you buy. So when we look at Nike, what does Nike make? Carlos, what does Nike make? Mostly.
Shoes.
Shoes and apparel, right? Mostly shoes and apparel. We know them. And how do they sell shoes?
By marketing, by getting athletes to wear it, to use them.
Yes. Celebrity endorsement and association. And they write this slogan called Just Do It. Then there's this real question is, why do you buy? Why do they buy? And it's not what you think. Carlos, are you a Nike fan?
I am.
Okay, I'm more an Adidas fan, but I have some Nike gear too. Do you know why you buy?
I like the style, the design.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else?
Function.
Function. That's what a lot of people say, style and function. Okay.
I trust that if they invest all that and actually get an endorsement, that the product quality will be good. So like I do more of that analytical price quality calculation.
Right. But very similar to Carlos though. Go on.
Yeah. But one of the answers, and I've done this exercise with you, Chris, which has made me think deeper to it, is status, right? It's like my association with being able to wear Nike starts conversations with other people who also like wear Nike. I feel like I'm part of something.
So here's what I'm going to challenge all of you guys. Just go ahead and take those notes down and we'll play this game together. I'm not telling you my breakdown of this is the breakdown. It's just my breakdown. Okay. So this is really interesting. Like notice neither of the guys said, because I aspire to be a professional athlete. Yet what Nike does is it associates itself with certain types of people. Michael Jordan, maybe LeBron James, or, did Kobe have a shoe with them or is that a different company?
I don't know.
Yeah, he was with Adidas, but then eventually he went over to Nike as well, right? Okay, so none of us are saying because we want to be professional athletes. But that's all they do. They associate with professional athletes, Serena Williams and everybody else. And this whole campaign of Just Do It, maybe we don't fully understand that. The typical answer that most people say, because they're not fully aware of the emotional parts, especially if I'm dealing with a lot of logical people, they're like design and function. Like we assume they spent so much money in R&D. So here's the weird thing. Initially when Nike started out, Phil Knight was all about function. Like he wanted to make the best racing shoes, right? Because that's what mattered to him. But somewhere along the way, I guess even against his own wishes, they're like, you know what sells better? Lifestyle shoes. And he reluctantly agreed. And that forever changed the fortunes of Nike. And you can watch movies and documentaries on some of this and get insight into it, okay? But here's the thing. What we don't realize is there are more stylish shoes that you can buy, for sure. I think even inarguably, there are better functioning shoes that are better for your feet, that are built for a wider variety of feet, like New Balance, for example. But New Balance is not worth a fraction of what Nike is worth. So when we say we're really buying it logically for style and function, when we're challenged with that, We're not really buying it for style or function. It's not as analytical as you think. And I want to highlight something. What we do is we make decisions emotionally. So we buy emotionally, and then we post-rationalize with logic why we bought it. Okay? Like when you say to your partner, oh, we need a new motorcycle. We don't ever need a new motorcycle. It's because you want to feel young again. You want to feel like a rebel. And that's why Harley Davidson sells more motorcycles to professionals than they do rebel outlaw drug addicts. But we want to join a tribe of wannabe outlaws. But no one admits that though, right? So we're like, no, because, it's a more efficient vehicle. It gets better miles per gallon, or it's built better. It's like it's American made. We tell ourselves this kind of story. So when you're a marketer, don't sell to the logic because you're going to lose. The British Airways example is one of many in the case studies of marketing. We make this mistake. So what we're seeking is identity. Who am I when I buy this product? What does that make me? And what am I signaling to others about my values and my beliefs? That's the core. Not easy to do, but what I want to do just to help you get some insight into this. And it's a game, and I think this is a really smart group that you've gathered. To my surprise, at last year's conference, people were really engaged with the creative part, which kind of took me aback. I'm like, wow, you guys really like this stuff. I thought it was all numbers with you. So I believe in every person, especially people who don't have a creative title, are really just frustrated creatives inside. I know one specific person who is a really frustrated graphic designer. That person's name is Hector Garcia, because he wanted to design everything. I'm like, bro, hire a designer, please, because you wouldn't want me to do your books. But, I also want to encourage him. And I know that this exists within each of you. So we buy Nikes, I think, because Nike subconsciously tells us that within each one of us is the potential for human achievement. That's the thing. That's a club we're trying to join.
I mean, Chris, you just had a light bulb moment. It also kind of talks to frustrated athletes that, like, I was in track and field in high school, and I used to do pole vault and I used to do high jump, and right. So I associate with that dream state of mine where, like, I wanted to be the Venezuelan goalkeeper, the national Venezuela, as a dream, right? And it's like there's still dreams that we all had as kids that I think companies like Nike and Adidas do a great job at tapping into these frustrated dreams that never came through. That maybe they were innocent, small dreams because we were limited by certain maybe gifts that were or talent or physical limitations that we maybe didn't have that these other athletes could have. I mean, I'm just saying that could be a possibility too.
Yeah, well, that taps into it, that within each one of us, whether you're an athlete, a former jock or not, it doesn't really matter because the message is universal. The potential for greatness. Whatever happened in your life, you had a knee injury, you're too short, you're too tall, you're too skinny, you're too fat, whatever it is, you didn't become the gold medalist or the world champion, but there's more in you than you think. So the sleeper must awaken. There's a giant lurking in you, and you must awaken the giant. And that's what they're really doing. But they don't say that. They build this campaign over decades. And this messaging and how they frame the stories. Like, you're watching a Nike commercial because something stirs inside of you. The music, the editing, the framing, the storyline reminds you on a subconscious level. And it's a beautiful thing. They sell way more shoes to non-athletes than to athletes. And the Olympics was just over. And I enjoyed this Olympics more than any other Olympic I've ever watched. Because the Olympics are now finally in the age of social media. So you get funny stories and memes of, like, the Australian kangaroo breakdancing lady, or the one pole vaulter guy, the pommel horse, who just focused on one event and helped the US gymnastic teams win a medal. And they needed him to score nearly a perfect score. And he's kind of a nerdy gymnast, and he just does it. So finally, the sporting world has learned how to tell stories that are relatable, to a large audience, from athlete to audience, and from audience member to other audience. Now, guys, I want to challenge you a little bit. I've seen this screen pop up a couple of times. And what you're doing is you're factually selling to me right now. But you haven't told a story. You haven't given me the emotional hook. You said, this is the hotel, the block's running out, or there's a deadline. You told me how much it costs, but you haven't really given me a reason why I should buy. So I think, let me just look at the time here. We need to spend a minute to talk about why anyone should show up. Okay, and I'm going to help you out a little bit here. One of the lessons I've learned in my life is that the best, most powerful, transformative moments don't happen in the ways that you think. You don't go and take a course and spend 14 weeks and go through step A through Z, and then a transformative moment happens. The most powerful, the most expensive and valuable lessons you learn is usually when someone helps you to see the world in a different way. That's it. Okay? When someone helps you to see the world in a different way, I'm going to give you one example, right? I was sitting in the green room, and it's part of a taping for a competition I'm a part of. And one of the other coaches and mentors is a woman named Jasmine Starr, who I know of, but I've never really spoken to her before. I've seen her speak on stage. I've watched her content online. And we're sitting around and we're just chatting. She goes, Chris, oh, good to meet you, blah, blah, blah. We're just chatting. And we got to talk about masterminds, and I hadn't done one, and she's done many, both as a client and as a person who's the leader of such a group. And she was listening to me, and she said, Chris, I'm going to give you a piece of advice. I'm like, what is that? She goes, you know what? Shorten the time of your mastermind. Instead of doing it a year-long thing, do it for 6 months, or you do it even less. And I was hell-bent on doing it for a year. She goes, you might not like it. You might want to change things. And I walked away saying, challenged. And I said, okay, fine. She told me to do 3 months, but I said, no, I'll do 6 months. I'll chop it in half. And so I do that. I'm going to bookend this whole story for you. In doing so, really saved my bacon because I didn't know what I was doing. I enrolled a few people, and it was kind of running in a way. I'm like, oh, I'm not ready for this. So I was really glad when the 6 month was over, so I can re-engineer and innovate and think about what it is I wanted compared to what actually happened. Okay? And thank God she told me that, because I would still be running that mastermind right now until November. And that would probably like make me want to kill myself. So she didn't get paid to teach me. I didn't pay her to teach me. But that one conversation saved me a lot of headache and tens of thousands of dollars of losses or potential profit. So we think these big, radical, transformative moments are going to come with just walls and walls of information, but it's actually in conversation or someone who teaches to look at a problem from a different point of view. And that's what Jasmine did for me. She reframed what a mastermind meant to me, so I was able to choose a different path. Now, we get back to this whole like Don Draper thing, looking at a problem a certain way. And just like Conrad Hilton was in love with his mouse, I was in love with this really long ass program. And she got me to see it a different way. And I think when you attend a conference like this, you're going to want to take pages and pages of notes, but that's not going to be the thing that's going to transform your business and your life. It's going to be in a conversation that you probably have with somebody at your table. Or maybe Carlos or Hector leans in and says, oh, you know, during one of the exercises, have you thought about doing it this way? That's the thing that's going to be your Conrad Hilton moment. That's when Hector's going to lean in and say, Connie, even a starving snake will commit suicide because it'll take on too much. And the way that Jasmine helped me was, it's harder to sell a 12-month program. It's much easier to sell a 6-month program or a 3-month program because the commitment is much smaller. So in Draper's words, I just want a chance at a piece of your business. So that's me trying to dovetail and bring all of what we talked about into like one little moment for all of you.
Thank you, Chris. I want to just add a couple of things, and this is going to be related to last year. A couple of things. the most feedback that we got about last year that people said about the experience that they had was the word magical kept coming back up. And I feel like the magic couldn't have happened if it weren't for generous people like yourself, and just the team that we had to support us to make the event as great as possible. You know, the ability to be fluid and flexible, our AV team, the support staff, and just really the people who came to that, they showed up intentional. We were all willing to be vulnerable, because what tends to happen is all of these conferences, and you have a lot of experience in this, right, Chris, where like a lot of people kind of tend to show this facade of like this personality that they need to be, or they need to perform for someone. But we were very vulnerable. We were willing to share the full transparency of the mistakes that we've made along the lines, and we made mistakes within the conference and we fixed them. We made the admissions, and it just created such a wonderful space for everyone to feel like they could also feel safe to be vulnerable with each other. And it allowed us to have honest, deep conversations, so much so that I remember in your keynote, there were two moments that resonate with me. One is, and Tanya's here on the line, when Tanya was was trying to answer a question, and you were like, no, and somebody else tried to help, and you said, no, let her sweat. But it was such a magical, special moment where everybody respected that, right? Let the person that's trying to, solve this answer with you, together with us. And everybody was respectful and mindful and kind enough to allow that person to figure it out. And there was a second moment where you remember, I think it was Mariette, where she would just like literally say what was in her brain in the moment that she discovered something. She's like, oh my God, that's amazing. And like everybody would crack up, right? Like it was just, those were the magical moments that created, such a special, experience, not only for myself, I know for you, for Hector and the other speakers, but I think for the participants. And I think we had like 70 people out of the 90 that immediately bought, the next year, right? Because we were all just so invested, and we just really loved the experience. So that's my point of view. Does that help? Is that a better version of saying why people should come?
Yeah, I think telling stories and highlighting moments allow people to say, like, is that something I want in my life or not? Is that a value to me? And, as a testament to both of you guys, in terms of the kinds of speakers that you're able to attract, let's just face it, y'all, accounting, sorry to say this if you're offended, it's a little bit boring. It can be very dry. And the fact that you can attract thought leaders and people who are brilliant to come together to share their time, their very valuable time, and their energy and their creativity with your audience is a testament to both you guys and the community you've been able to create and the relationships you've been able to foster. I gotta be honest, if another accounting organization invited me, not that there would be one, I'm like, no, I'm not really interested, because it's going to be really dry and it's not something I want to do. But, I guess to my surprise, and I shouldn't be surprised, was how playful your audience were. That I would make jokes and they would play and they'd push and they would allow for a minute, even just for a minute, to say, like, I don't have to be the accountant right now. I can be the creative child that I always was. And I get to remember that person, and maybe they took something away. So when you go to any conference, whether you go to Reframe or something else, make a promise with yourself. Only show up if you're going to have an open heart and open mind to allow you to trust and believe in what is happening, and transformation can happen then. Save yourself some money, time, and heartache and headache for the guys and for myself. Don't show up if you're going with a preconceived idea as to how it's supposed to be done. What frustrates me as a coach is someone who wants my help, but then tells me how I have to help them and the way I need to help them. Like, well, obviously you know what to do, so what can I do? So that's all I have to say. If nothing else, I'm really looking forward to hanging out with the two of you guys and cooking up some crazy stuff and maybe breaking some minds. That's what I want.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Chris, you've given us more than what we've asked. And as always, such a generous spirit. We're so excited to have you come again to celebrate our second annual conference and to many more, my friend. Thank you for being here. Always tons of knowledge, tons of wisdom. Folks, this is your last call. Don't miss it. If you're hanging on your seat thinking about it, if you're on the fence, this will be the best money you'll ever spend, and the best time meeting lifelong friends and transforming yourself and making it a really wonderful experience. By the way, beachfront hotel with a lot of social events and a lot of networking, a lot of learning. So that's our last, this is our last event, our pre-frame event. And I know there's a bonus episode coming in October. Be on the lookout for that. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for hanging out another 13 minutes. Thank you again, Chris. We love you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Looking
See you
forward to
soon.
hanging out. Bye.
Yeah.